Big Pine Lakes, one of the most beautiful hiking destinations in the entire Sierra Nevada region that needs to be on your bucket list. I recently had the chance to visit, and it was one of the most incredible hikes I've done in my home state of California. To ensure your epic adventure here, I've put together this lake-by-lake guide going over important planning logistics, my top 5 tips, and answering whether it's overall worth it to hike beyond the iconic Lake 2. Here is your ultimate hiking guide to Big Pine Lakes. The first thing you need to decide is when to go. Late spring and summer are the most popular times to visit. While you may encounter more crowds, mosquitoes, and warmer temperatures, you will also enjoy the lake at their peak turquoise color. Fall is another great time to visit. The temperature is much cooler and you'll find less people and more tranquility. I personally hiked in mid-November and thought it was still absolutely gorgeous and well worth it. While Big Pine Lakes is generally considered a strenuous hike, I found that the elevation gain was pretty steady throughout, making it easier on the legs. Most people hike out and back to Lake 2, averaging 10 miles and 2,500 feet of elevation. If you push further to Lake 6, it's about 16 miles and 4,000 feet of elevation gain. What can also make the hike harder is the altitude. Altitude sickness can occur at 8,000 feet, which this hike is well above, so make sure to stay hydrated. You can make this a day hike and visit all of the lakes, but it will take the majority of your day. I hiked 11 hours and used the entire daylight in the fall. You can, of course, make it a backpacking trip. We were initially going to backpack, but the weather was below freezing at night and I did not have the appropriate gear at the time. There are plenty of campsites at each lake, but make sure to hike early if you want to claim the best spots, especially if you want Lake 2. You need a permit via recreation.gov for the Big Pine Creek North Fork Trail, link in the description below. Permits open 6 months and 2 weeks before your intended date of travel, promptly at 7 a.m. Due to the popularity of this trail, permits can sell out quickly like concert tickets, so make sure to set an alarm. Big Pine Lakes is located near the town of Big Pine. From LA, it's a 4 to 5 hour drive. We decided to stay in a hotel in Lone Pine, which is an hour south from the trailhead the night before, so we can get an early start to our hike in the morning. You could also stay in the towns of Bishop or Big Pine, which are even closer, just a 15 to 30 minute drive from the trailhead. There are 2 parking lots, one at the trailhead and one at the designated overnight parking. Because the overnight parking adds a mile to the hike, I recommend getting to the trailhead early. Now that the travel planning is complete, let's start the hike. I hiked with a close friend from college. We started right at the break of dawn. It was chilly, but our spirits were high and we were so excited to start. The first mile, believe it or not, was the steepest part of the entire trail. Despite the tortuous switchbacks, you are awarded with incredible scenery from the get-go. With a waterfall, and snow-capped mountains in the distance. After that, the trail is steadily uphill and is well marked throughout. Three miles in, you'll come across the Lon Chaney cabin, named after a silent film actor who starred in The Hunchback of Notre Dame and Phantom of the Opera. It was built in 1930 and has been preserved by the National Forest Service ever since. When we came in the fall, there was some snow and ice that became more prevalent on the trail the higher the altitude. It was easy to bypass by going along the sides, and thankfully no spikes were needed. You'll find that the trail will go along the creek every now and then. The river, of course, was pristine. Soon enough, you will see Temple Crag in the distance, signaling the lakes are coming soon. We were beaming with anticipation. The trail felt even more electric. And before you knew it, you've made it to the first lake. Most lakes have a pathway to get down closer to the lake, Lake 1 included. These pathways are not marked on all trails, but are not too hard to find. Unfortunately, we didn't go down to Lake 1, but the view from the main trail itself did not disappoint. We were just too excited to see Lake 2, which was just around the corner. Lake 2 was magical. Everything from Temple Crag and its jagged peaks to the half-frozen lake, Lake 2 seemed like, as my grandmother described it later, a Bob Ross painting. While the lake's color was a dark blue-green, not the turquoise it's known for in the summer, it was still a sight to behold. Admittedly, I was a bit skeptical of visiting in the fall, but that skepticism was completely shattered. This was a winter wonderland treat. You could also head down to the lake where you'll find a sandy beach. You could see the gradient of the water levels throughout the year. In the summer, this would be a great time to take a dip, but I was not about to do that in a half-frozen lake. We use this time to refill our water and take in the views one last time. Now, the big question is it worth it to hike beyond Lake 2? Unless you're absolutely exhausted, I recommend making the short half-mile walk to Lake 3. It offers a different view of the imposing Temple Crag with a relatively small amount of additional effort. When we went, the lake was completely frozen, which I've never seen before and made the experience even cooler. So if you are questioning going to Lake 3, simply do it. But the next question is it worth it to then hike to Lake 4 or 5, which are even further away? Before I get to Lake 5, there is an option to hike to the Palisades Glacier, one of the southernmost glaciers in North America. From Lake 2, it is another 8 miles round trip with 2,500 feet of elevation gain. We did not do this, but we've heard great things, and it may be worth it as a day hike if you've camped at Lake 2 or 3. But back to the main trail. You will come across a fork in the road and you can either see Lake 4 or 5 first. We chose Lake 5. Simply put, Lake 5 was our favorite. It was so peaceful and we were in complete solitude. We were not expecting the lake to be flowing and so clear due to the higher altitude, so it was a nice surprise. We found the perfect place to sit down and eat our lunch. Shout out to Good To Go for delicious marinara pasta. So is it worth it to hike to Lake 5? My answer is a resounding yes. Just remember that from Lake 2, this is an additional 4 miles round trip. The hardest decision for us was deciding to either loop around to Lake 4 and head back to the car, or continue and see Summit Lake, Lake 6, and possibly Lake 7. The distance was less of the issue, it was more so the timing. The sun sets early this time of year around 4:45 p.m. and it was already past midday. Summit Lake is, for whatever reason, not a numbered lake. It is an additional quarter-mile round trip with only 100 feet of elevation and was easy to add. The snow was getting a bit thicker and we noticed there were no other footprints. The lake was nice, not the most spectacular though. We wanted to be completionists, so we went over here. Overall, I recommend coming here for a quick stop. The trek to Lake 6 adds about 2.5 miles round trip from Lakes 4 or 5. For me, this was the hardest part of the hike. The higher altitude at a max of 11,250 feet made the elevation gain feel twice as hard. Nonetheless, the trail was nice with the meadows and the diverse scenery. To describe Lake 6 in one word, grand. Unfortunately, we did not go to Lake 7 because there wasn't a well-marked path and we wanted to get to the car before sundown. However, if you've gone to Lake 7, please let us know in the comments if it was worth it. On the way back down, you will see Lake 4. Out of all the numbered lakes, Lake 4 was the least scenic without a dramatic backdrop like the others. I don't recommend camping here unless other spots are taken. On the way down, we somehow missed the trail that would make a loop to Black Lake. Therefore, we ended up passing lakes 3, 2, and 1 again, adding an additional 1.5 miles accidentally. This, however, ended up being a nice mistake because the lakes were so pretty and nice to view in different lighting, and we got to reassess which ones were our fave. Also, I heard Black Lake isn't too picturesque, so I didn't feel like we were missing out on too much. Ultimately, it took 3.5 hours from 1:30 to 5 p.m. to get from Lake 6 to the parking lot. For the entire hike, we hiked from 6 a.m. to 5 p.m. It was one epic journey that my friend and I will never forget. For tip number 1, hike beyond Lake 2 if you're able to. It is absolutely worth it to go to all the lakes, but maybe not 7 if you are physically capable and have the time. In researching the hike, everyone talks about Lake 2, you see it all the time on Instagram, but what about Lakes 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7? So if you are capable of doing so, I recommend going past Lake 2. Tip number 2, bring a water filter. Even if you're only doing a day hike, a water filter will save you a lot of weight. I'll link the one I use in the description below. There are plenty of water sources even in the late fall with lakes 2 and 5 flowing. Water is especially important in high altitude settings to avoid getting altitude sickness. Tip number 3, spend time at the lakes. You have to enjoy the scenery. We took our time spending 30 to even 45 minutes at lakes 2 and 5 to take in the views and enjoy our food. Tip number 4, find a stay close to the trailhead for an early start. One of the decisions we had to make before our trip was whether or not we wanted to drive very early in the morning, I'm talking 1 or 2 a.m. and drive to the trailhead, or stay in a nearby town the night before. We decided to do the latter, which was well worth it, even though we had to pay money obviously to stay in those accommodations. I think we would have been miserable if we drove from our houses and went straight to the hike. Tip number 5, combine a trip to Alabama Hills the day before. Because we stayed at Lone Pine the day before, Lone Pine is kind of the gateway to the Mount Whitney portal, and close to there is Alabama Hills. So we just kind of made it a weekend trip where we checked out Alabama Hills, super scenic, highly recommend if you haven't gone before. That way it kind of makes your trip a fuller weekend getaway, if you will. Alright, so that was my ultimate guide to hiking Big Pine Lakes. If anyone has hiked to the Palisades Glacier or Lake 7, I'm super interested in what your experience was. I want to personally thank you if you've made it this far in the video. This is, if you haven't noticed, my first ever YouTube video on this channel. My goal, my intention is to provide helpful travel content to make your travel planning much easier. If you're like most people, then you've probably grown over the entire travel planning process. I mean, it takes time and energy and it may feel overwhelming, but for whatever reason, I really enjoy doing it. I enjoy putting itineraries and road trips together. I have lots of content planned ahead, including an upcoming trip to Mexico, as well as more hiking adventures. So please subscribe to not miss out, and maybe you can be a part of the beginning of my YouTube journey. Happy travel planning, and see you in the next adventure.